Meeting. Committee members, I do appreciate you being here. It took me 2.5 hours to get here this morning. We know how bad the roads are. I appreciate you being here, and we are going to work to get our work done today so that you can make your way safely, hopefully, back home. I want to start off by I didn't want us to stay here any longer than we needed to, and that's why when we found out that the room was available at noon, we moved it up an hour. Wanted you to have something to eat. I want to say thank you because I made the order originally that I would pay for it, but then Steve with Dugan and Associates stepped forward, Steve Green, and he not only paid for your lunch, but he went and picked up. So that meant that our committee assistant didn't have to go do that. So absolutely, thank you to Dugan and Associates and Steve Green for making sure that you guys had something to get you through the noon hour. We are wanting to work on some final action. Now, Monday, we will also be having a hearing, and I do want you, if time permits, I want you to make sure that you do take a look at Senate Bill 499. I believe it is a blessed bill right now, but do want you to look at it so that you're ready for questions when we have testimony. I do want us to work on Senate Bill 362, so that will be our final action, will be early on, so that you know that is that requiring local boards of education to document and consider the student needs assessment and state assessments in the budget process. Your colleague, Senator Dietrich, has been working with KSB, USA, the revisers to come up with some amendments and KPI so that we can move forward on that. So I certainly appreciate that work. Something that at first seemed like there was opposition. It looks as if they are working together to come up with a solution, which is what we always want to work for. We will not have an assessment tool completely drafted out. So what that document that they will use, but the work has started on that and they will come to an agreement on that. So at this time, we will start our work on Senate Bill 341, which is removing federal impact aid for the determination of local foundation aid in the Kansas School Equity and Enhancement Act. So we're going to work on that bill, but I want you to know that there is an amendment. And the amendment is, for the most part, the contents of Senate Bill 31. Last year we had a hearing on Senate Bill 31. The year before it was a different number, a different Senate bill number, but we did pass a version of that in the Senate 2 years ago, 40-0. So when we are talking about excluding USD number 207, so Fort Leavenworth and virtual schools from capital improvement state aid determination, this is not a new discussion for this committee. It will not be new action for the Senate. It was requested by Senate leadership that we work to bring these together so that we can get this resolved. And quite frankly, what we're talking about is two separate issues that in all of the Gannon discussion with the resolution that was agreed upon by the state Supreme Court, we are working legislatively to fix two issues that have never been resolved across the street by the Department of Education. So with that, I will start by asking our reviser, Tamara Lawrence, to please give us just a quick, brief review of Senate Bill 341. I think you'll remember the testimony that we had, and I appreciate that the general's here again in case we have any questions. So let's start with 341, see if there are any questions on that, and then we'll move to the Bloom Amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You actually did a really good job explaining this already, but Senate Bill 341, okay. It would remove that amount equal to 70% of federal impact aid from the definition of local foundation aid So for school districts that do receive federal impact aid, which most schools do not, this change would reduce their local foundation aid determination, which would then increase their state foundation aid determination by the same amount. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. And to remind the committee, we all received this spreadsheet when we had our hearing on the bill. There are 23 school districts that are impacted. They are on either what we would consider our military or near our military bases, as well as other public land that primarily impacts our Native American residents. So, committee, are there any questions or amendments that you have requested for Senate Bill 341? Senator Petty.
Madam Chair, I do not have an amendment, but I do have a question, particularly since you mentioned Senate Bill 31.
Okay. Do you want to wait for that balloon, or do you want to ask that now?
Okay, I'll wait for the balloon, sorry.
All right. So I'm not seeing any specific question. Oh, there we go. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And can you just remind me, I believe the amount, I know it varies, but was around, I believe around 13 million. Can you just refresh my memory on that? Thank you.
According to the fiscal note, yes, it is about 13 million.
And just so you know, our Chair of Ways and Means is fully aware of this piece of legislation. He absolutely knows that it's coming their way. And so eyes are wide open with regard to that. So at this time, Tamara, I will ask you if you will go ahead and hand out the balloon amendment. And I am not going to pretend it's a simple balloon amendment. It's not. It's a large balloon amendment. And in talking with revisers, we will probably refer to this as a Senate substitute, hoping that we have an affirmative motion on this. And so this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting, because our reviser will give us backup information about the amendment. And then we also have, I'm thinking, do we have Mr. Avey? Is he with us virtually? Okay. So we also have the individual, you know, it's interesting, sometimes we actually have people come to the legislature with solutions. And I would say that Mr. Avey, Dustin Avey, is the one that came with the solution, because for several years, even the Department of Education couldn't figure out why things were happening in an interesting way with regard to capital improvement. So now let's go right to our reviser to explain the balloon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, you can see some changes to the title, but I want to make clear that the section that's included in Senate Bill 341 dealing with the federal impact aid is not amended by this balloon. So that stays exactly as it is in the underlying bill. What this balloon does is, as the chair mentioned, it brings in 2021 Senate Bill 31. And what that bill did was it excluded Fort Leavenworth and virtual school students from the calculation for capital improvement state aid. And this would be on and after July 1, 2022. That was Senate Bill 31. Additionally, this balloon, you can see on the back, extends the bond cap that is currently set to expire for another 5 years, so to July of 2027. And then it also explicitly excludes districts that are not qualified for or that have opted out of receiving capital improvement state aid. So this, in addition to Senate Bill 31, it also, those two provisions that I said that extend the bond cap and the opting out, those are both specific to capital improvement state aid. And I'll be happy to answer questions.
So committee, what questions do you have? We might start with the most basic of what might we remove Fort Leavenworth from capital improvement state aid?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So currently, the Fourth Leavenworth School District is included in the AVPP schedule and has the lowest AVPP of all school districts, but it does not have the authority to issue bonds. So what this would do is by removing Fort Leavenworth, what would currently be the second lowest district's AVPP would receive that 75% state aid percentage. So it would, by removing it, it would sort of even out all of the other districts that receive the state aid.
Okay. So essentially, Fort Leavenworth should have never been on that list because they never could participate in bonds. And so it is removing them. They should have never been on the list. But all these years, they have been on the list. So it creates an inappropriate skew, if you will, from the AVPP. Senator O'Shea, did you have a question? Because this would be a little new to you, though we did address it last year, but that was a year ago. So go ahead.
AVPP.
Assessed valuation per pupil.
Okay. Senator Sulentrop, and then Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. You know, in this balloon amendment, it identifies virtual students. And with the pandemic, it's brought about a little bit of a change in the way we teach and educate children in classroom and or out.
Correct.
Is there an hourly number or something thereof that constitutes a non-quote applied virtual student or a non-identified virtual student that we require our in-class students to be in class? Is there any more distinction necessary or any more description necessary to help make sure that determination is clear?
That's a good question. I'll ask for clarification from our revisor. Language in the past, I assume we are still there, and I'm looking for it. But to be clear, up until this would get passed, school districts, and I'll use an example because this school district is in my Senate district. So Spring Hill School District has a face-to-face enrollment of pre-K through high school, and it has a separate virtual school. So when they would go for the issuance of bonds, they would use not only the face-to-face student enrollment, but they would use the enrollment that occurs every fall, same time, for the virtual students. So they were counting virtual students as students of the district, even though those students would never be in a brick and mortar. So it is designed specifically to address those districts that have both public, but one is brick and mortar. Students are enrolled for those attendance buildings, whereas the virtual students would never have an attendance building. So do we have clarification from our revisor?
So I just checked in the Virtual School Act, and we don't define virtual school student. There are students who can be full-time enrolled virtual students and part-time enrolled students, and I would have to check with someone from the department to know if both of those groups are included or just one or the other. I don't know right offhand.
So we have someone here from the department, Mr. Nunswander or Mr. Hess. Would either one of you like to address that?
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. Virtual students that we're talking about in this bill are enrolled in a virtual school, which is different than a student enrolled in a traditional school who happens to be taking an online course. And that terminology in my mind is how I distinguish between the two. If you're enrolled in a traditional school and your fifth-hour class happens to be provided online, you're still a traditional student, you're just taking an online course, as opposed to being enrolled in a virtual school.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Senator Sulentrop? Okay. Now, Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick questions probably for the reviser. So on the removal of Fort Leavenworth, there's no way to have a fiscal note on that because it would depend on those districts that have bond issues. Is that correct, or do we have a ballpark fiscal note associated with that?
And I think we'll let the reviser look at that. But Mr. Avey, it's my understanding that you ran some, you did a run on some numbers with regard to school districts. I thought our last conversation indicated that you felt it would be pretty much a net neutral. Could you add more to that, or could you just directly answer the question of Senator Erickson?
Yes, Madam Chair. Again, Dustin Avey with Piper Sandler. That is correct. We project this being a budget neutral fix. If you recall, going back to prior legislation that was considered by the committee in the Senate, there was a proposal to go back retroactively to July 1 of 15 to fix the law. That, if done, would have required a fiscal note to the state. As a result of this balloon amendment being effective for bonds authorized by voters after July 1 of 2022, we expect it to be budget neutral to the state.
If I may follow up, Madam
Yes.
Chair, I'm not understanding how it's budget neutral because you're raising the amount compared to prior to this legislation. So comparing prior to post this legislation, there would be an increase in expenditures to the state. There would have to be, because we're removing the one that keeps that lowest 25 districts. Am I not understanding that correctly?
No, so that's actually a really good question. So if you think about, we have really two laws currently. We have a pre-15 law and we have an after 15 law. If we look at the projections for bonds are still being retired when they were authorized by voters after 2015, the current state expenditure related to capital improvement state aid currently for this fiscal year, I believe, is right around 200 million. As those bonds that were authorized by voters before 2015 continue to be paid off over time, they're going to be replaced by bonds authorized by voters if approved with this balloon after July 1 of 22 at a different level of state aid. So for example, and I think it's important as we think about Fort Leavenworth, right? So if Fort Leavenworth were to receive state aid, they would be getting 111% of their bond payment paid for by the state. And so when we cap the poorest assessed valuation per pupil district at 75%, right now we're taking Fort Leavenworth at 111% and we're capping them at 75. That's 36 percentage points. So every other district in the state of Kansas, their state aid percentage has been reduced by 36 percentage points. By removing Fort Leavenworth, we're not going back to the pre-15 percentage. We are providing more equity to those school districts. And a great example of this would be as if we had a district under the old law that was receiving 30%, they're now getting 0%. With this Senate substitute or balloon amendment, they'd be getting 22%. So we're not going back to where we were pre-15, but we are providing additional equity by removing Fort Leavenworth.
Follow up.
Which I believe it would be an increased expenditure. My second question would be for the reviser is, should the committee not decide to do this, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, would it affect anything to do with the Gannon ruling as was brought up from the previous conferee in terms of equity?
Not as far as I know. Gannon is still an active case, so just be mindful of that as you make decisions. But the way that this formula was written is the way that it was presented to the Kansas Supreme Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Mr. Avey, please share with the committee what would happen if we don't pass the balloon amendment, which would then expire the cap.
So thank you, Madam Chair. So there's really kind of two components to this, right? Now, so let's think about, and I would say in 2015, right? I think that the state recognized an unintended consequence of the pre-15 law based upon the expenditures being paid to school district under the capital improvement state aid law. I would say we're probably in the same position today as we were in 2015, being 7 years into this new law. We're trying to figure out, hey, there's an unintended consequence of this new law as a result of the inclusion of Fort Leavenworth in the calculation. So I would tell you that I think if this balloon, there's two parts, right? There's the state aid component and then there's the bond cap component. In 2017, the state imposed a bond cap on school districts to help the state manage, the intent was to help the state manage the expense related to capital improvement state aid by limiting the amount of new bonds authorized and issued by school districts. And that limitation was based upon the amount of principal retired in the previous fiscal year. So they somewhat go hand in hand. And so with this renewal, with this renewal of the bond cap, we're still managing and controlling the state's expense on an ongoing basis, but at the same time providing that equity as a result of removing Fort Leavenworth.
And I'll ask Mr. Nunswander to please respond to this. With regard to the cap, the bond cap, were there not a bond cap, what is the legislators' input on any of the bonds that school districts go after when there is a responsibility for the state to pay for some of that? Does that make sense?
It does. I want to think for a minute to make sure I'm not overlooking something. So, Madam Chair, when a school district attempts a bond election, if they meet certain criteria, if it exceeds 14%, if they receive state aid currently, then they apply to the state board who approves it. Other than the bond cap, and revisers can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe the legislature plays a role in the process anywhere.
That's my understanding, and that was one of the reasons the bond cap was put in there, is because there had been such an increase of obligation by the state. And there is no legislative oversight on that election.
Correct. I should say, and this probably isn't what you meant, but the only legislative involvement is you do set the formula for what the state aid percentage is. Okay. But as far as any involvement in a given bond election or application, I don't believe there is.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Senator Erickson and then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was handed some additional information from the revisor, which I think may be helpful, at least it was to me. To clarify, for the short-term fiscal effect, the enactment of the bill would be negligible. However, for the long-term fiscal effect, the enactment of the bill would increase capital improvement state aid expenditures to school district. So it's hard to estimate a fiscal effect without knowing which school districts would approve bond issues and how much bonding authority would be authorized. So thank you for that clarification. I just want to share that with the committee.
But again, Mr. Nunswander, could you respond to that with regard to the cap?
I'm sorry, we were discussing my previous response. Could you?
She will repeat.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Good to see you again. Just clarifying the short-term fiscal effect of the enactment of this bill would be negligible, but the long-term fiscal effect, the enactment of the bill would increase capital improvement state aid expenditures to school district. However, it would be hard to know what that would be because we don't know how many schools would have bonds, et cetera.
Correct. So we may be talking about comparing two different sets of numbers. Compared to what would be paid out under the current law, yes, this would be an increase because state aid percentages are going higher. I believe Mr. Avey is comparing to what we are paying out now, and that's why as one comes off and the other goes on, it balances out. So I think we're talking two sets of numbers. If I could back up, the reason we were discussing it, John reminded me, there is in statute a 6-year average limit on the amount of state aid that's paid out. So that would still be in place with or without the cap.
The other thing, would you please share with us, what is the impact by pulling virtual students away from the cap? How does that impact for school districts?
So the state aid percentage that any district receives is tied to their assessed valuation per pupil. So you take the total assessed valuation of the district, you divide it by the number of students. As Tamara mentioned, with virtual students included in that count, then the number you're dividing by, the number of students, is much larger, which makes their assessed valuation per pupil smaller and provides more state aid for that district. And so that's the impact of the virtual students on bond elections.
Thank you. Mr. Avey, do you have any idea on what the overall impact would be by pulling out the virtual students from the head count?
Madam Chair, we do have some data. Just give me a moment here. And it's hard to quantify because every school district is going to be different in terms of how that impacts a specific school district.
Right.
I would expect that it's 1 to 2 percentage points less of capital improvement state aid by removing virtual students.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, other questions? I'm sorry. Senator Petty, your hand is up again, and it was up before. I was supposed to call on you.
If I wait too long, I might forget what I was going to ask.
There we go. Write it down.
That's true. Just as for my sake, as a reminder, concerning Senate Bill 31, I believe that when we worked on this building fund before, that we also was put in legislation that it couldn't be used for sports facilities unless it was a safety and health replacement.
There we go. And
Correct?
I see my revisor, our revisor, nodding her head.
Thank you for your patience, committee. I needed to find where it was. So if you look on page 7 of the balloon, this is current law. There at the bottom, it says the state board shall exclude payments for any capital improvement project or portion thereof that proposes to construct, reconstruct, or remodel a facility that would be used primarily for extracurricular activities, unless it's that construction would be due to concerns relating to safety of the facility or disability access. So extracurricular facilities are excluded.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As was stated last year, we heard about the, effect of Fort Leavenworth being included, and that I thought we voted to exclude it at that time. Did we not? We did.
We did.
So then why do we need to have this back in this bill again? I'm trying to understand.
We'll let the revisor speak
Okay.
to that.
Thank you. Senate Bill 31, which you are referencing, actually passed out of this committee last year, but did not pass fully across the Senate floor. And in 2020, a similar bill did actually pass the Senate floor, but because it was 2020, never got over the finish line.
So it is that cycle that we know from legislation that sometimes it takes several years. Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, I don't think we ran 31 on the Senate floor. Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you. So it's not that it didn't pass the Senate, it's just we did not work on it. Thank you.
I am not seeing any other questions or comments. So do I have a motion to amend Senate Bill 341 with the Bloom Amendment?
I'll make that.
Senator Dietrich, a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second from Senator O'Shea. Committee, any additional comments or questions about the Bloom Amendment? Seeing none, let's have a vote for that. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? The amendment carries. Committee, is there any additional discussion, any additional questions on Senate Bill 341 as amended? Yes. Senator Selentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is your mic on?
Would you, this be the appropriate time to remove the virtual school students from the calculation?
Are we talking about students that are in face-to-face?
Virtual.
Virtual are already removed in the balloon amendment.
Okay, I guess I missed that further down.
They are removed.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Committee, I am not seeing any other discussion or questions. So again, want to go back to the reviser. Since this amendment is significant, is it more appropriate to have it be a motion for Senate substitute for Senate Bill 341?
Because there aren't significant amendments in the actual text of 341, you can go either way.
Okay. So I will entertain a motion on this bill, and it will be up to whoever makes the motion to pick their poison as far as, do we want to keep it? Senate Bill 341 keeps it nice and clean. Everyone then knows what it is. Do I have a motion on that? Senator Dietrich.
Madam Chair, are you saying you would prefer it to just be move out Senate Bill 341 as amended favorably?
We have that indication from the reviser. That's just fine, so we will.
I will make that motion.
Okay. Do I have a second on that? I have a second from Senator Petty. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate Bill 341 passes as amended unanimously, and we hope to have it above the line next week so that we can move forward with this. So thank you very much for those that are here in attendance. Mr. Avey, thank you so much. You guys don't realize it, but he's at the airport waiting to get on a plane in Nashville. You're in for some cold weather and lots of snow when you return, but thank you so much for your participation today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Committee, I would like us now to turn to Senate Bill 215. It seemed like it was a straightforward bill, and then it became less straightforward. We did get information that was sent on to you. Our research department did look into the questions that had been posed with regard to transferring the authority for post-secondary driver's education programs and driver training schools from the State Board of Regents to the Department of Revenue. We did not get a definitive across the board with regard to reduction in insurance, but part of what we heard from, and this is really anecdotal, but part of what we heard is it might be up to a 10% reduction for teenagers that complete driver's ed as far as what their parents would be paying for their insurance. So we have that. So now if our reviser would please give us a brief overview of Senate Bill 341. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the top of my page. I don't know why. Senate Bill 215. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 215 would transfer the State Board of Education's authority for driver training schools and the Regents' authority for those post-secondary driver education programs to the Department of Revenue. And I will note that the committee has attempted to work this bill before and did adopt a balloon at that time. That balloon made technical adjustments to the dates because this was a 2021 bill, and it also added an amendment that the gentleman from Johnson County brought to the committee's attention to include community colleges on page 1 in that driver training.
Correct. Then we had discussion with regard to school districts receiving funds regardless of whether the students were taking them after school or in the summertime versus taking the courses, taking driver's education during class time, of which they were, districts were already counting them as their half credit. We were unable to determine, is that correct, from the Department of Education? We were unable to determine how many school districts actually were teaching that during the day? Or do we now have some new information?
Madam Chair, John Hess with the Department of Education. No, we do have, the information that we have is broken down by school districts who offer it during the summer and the school year. That school year could, I guess, theoretically be after school as well. But the majority of, I would say the vast majority of school districts offer their driver's education during the summer. A handful, talking like 3 to 5, offer both summer and school year, and then 30-ish offer it during the school year.
Thank you. So committee, are there any additional questions with regard to this bill? Senator Gossage.
I was rereading this bill. It's gotten kind of stale in my mind, but I knew we were talking about it today. And it appears to, if I'm putting this in a nutshell, that high schools were afforded certain state funds if they offered driver's education classes. Some of them are not doing that now, and so some of the colleges and other private entities are offering these courses that parents can, or classes that parents can sign their children up for, correct?
That is correct.
And so it seems to me that we are, unless I'm wrong, correct me, but we are favoring if that's done in a community college rather than in a private institution, because private institutions are not getting state aid for this. Is that right?
There is no reimbursement, and I will actually call on Mr. Hess to help with this as well, but there are no funds going to the community colleges, the technical colleges, or the for-profit, if you will, driver's education. It was just going to school districts. And part of that was because the Department of Education had identified the community colleges as being, what was the term that you used? Commercial?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, so for just, I would distinguish this is for the state safety fund for regular driver's education. Community colleges receive state aid currently receive state aid for commercial CDL classes and also for motorcycle safety classes. But for kind of what is defined as traditional driver's education, it is currently limited to students attending driver's education offered by school districts, and those taking driver's education at accredited non-public schools. So accredited private schools accredited by the state board, which are just, I believe, 2 this year. So the reason why the community colleges didn't receive state aid was has less to do with how they are currently regulated by the state board than the fact that the statute just did not specify that they could receive it. Their regulation status is kind of is separate, and that doesn't affect their state aid. It affects what applications and what requirements they have to be able to offer driver's ed, or how they're treated by currently treated by the state board in terms of just requirements for their program and those types of things.
Follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. So it appear, could you stay there? Thank you, if I may.
Yes.
So it appears to me then that it was offered, let's go back to why was it offered in the public schools? It was offered in the public schools because children get their driver's license when they turn 16, right? And they're still in high school. So if parents could either teach their children at home or they can sign them up for a course if it's not offered at their public school. So the commercial driver, I get that. That's, usually older. You're like 21, 18, I'm not sure. And the motorcycle license, usually older. So I'm trying to understand the purpose of this bill specifically as to why it's needed when, like I said, someone can go out for a for-profit, let's say, and hire them, or you can sign them. But I'm not as familiar with the courses at the community college, but wouldn't the parents pay a fee of some kind for their child to go? So the school is getting compensated, not necessarily from the safety fund, but they are getting compensated for offering the course, correct?
Madam Chair, Senator, there are, I believe, I'm not an expert on, right now I believe it's just Johnson County Community College is the only community college in the state that currently offers driver's ed. I think maybe KCK is also starting it up. And my understanding is that they charge a fee for their courses. School districts also charge fees, but they vary greatly from, I think someone was as low as $25 to some are up to around $300. Why state aid was out of the state safety fund was specified for public schools and students at public schools and accredited non-public schools is a decision made by the legislature. The statute has been around for several decades, and so that has been the practice. I will note that the amount of revenue received by the fund, it's funded by a portion of certain driver's licenses. Greatly expanding the number of people eligible for the fund then would significantly decrease the per pupil amount that is paid out because there's a limited pool of money. It's not like the school finance formula where you have inputs and that determines the amount of money. We have a kind of a finite pool of resources based on the amount of revenue that is coming into the fund each year, and that the more students you add for eligibility for that will decrease the amount per pupil that is paid out by the State Department of Education.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize if I missed this, but I believe when we worked on this bill before, heard this bill, there was a question about what all that safety fund could be used for. Is it being used to fund other initiatives? And I apologize if I did not receive that information. Did we ever find out what else that fund is used for?
Madam Chair, Senator, the documentation that was prepared by the State Department of Education, and I can resend it to Cindy if necessary. It's been several weeks. Included in the last attachment was some background on the State Safety Fund. The vast majority of expenditures from the State Safety Fund is to provide that state aid. We also have a few administrative expenditures to help fund an auditor who works on these, the position that kind of oversees oversees driver's education programs, school district driver's education programs. A portion of their salary is paid out of it, but the vast majority of the expenditures is for state aid.
Follow-up, Madam Chair. I know that there was some questions about the effectiveness. I'm assuming that if you've had driver's ed, there's an improvement in your driving ability, and I would hope. But also the question is, are there other areas that this safety money could be more effectively spent? And I don't know if that was addressed, but I'm also curious as to that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't think that you actually had any information about other areas that it could be spent. We were provided, and I forget if it came from you or if it came from legislative research, the data, the graphs as far as, because the questions really getting to what Senator Erickson was saying was, are there more tickets? Are there more injury accidents and so forth? So the data is collected based on age of when tickets and accidents and incidents occur, but it doesn't break it down as to whether they participated in driver's education. Senator Sykes, did you have a question?
I don't know if it's a question. If I am recalling, when we first had this hearing, we were looking, this was a way to make things more efficient and consistency and centralized.
Through the Department of Revenue, yes.
Yes.
Yes,
and,
it was.
And as someone who struggled to get my children in driver's ed, and I did it through Johnson County Community College for both my children, but I know I was on waiting list, and I think we're looking at a minimal amount of dollars, and I think it actually would allow possibilities for either a reduction on that cost to parents or availability of more slots. So I don't know, we've somehow gotten stuck in the weeds when I felt like this was a really good bill and it was trying to make things more efficient and making sure that our students were able to get those driver's license training, which I would say was very helpful for my insurance and my peace of mind for my children out there. So, Sorry, I'm just rambling now.
No, that's okay. Senator, would you like to make a motion on Senate Bill 215 as amended?
I would make a motion that we move.
Oh, yes.
I actually have an amendment for this bill.
Oh,
So, it was still, the discussion kept going on, and I thought,
right.
okay, we're going to get to that point at some point.
this is great. It makes it even more specific. Get your hand up. Hi. Senator Petty, please explain your balloon amendment.
So and actually, I was going to go to the point that Senator Sykes had brought up about the original intent of this bill. But you may recall that we heard how, as was just mentioned, like Johnson County Community College does offer driver's ed, and that their interest is just speaking to that same pool of students that would be offered driver's ed. And so the amendment that you see there, any student 19 years of age or under attending a community college conducting an approved course in driver's training. So they would be eligible for the funding that would now be coming from the Department of Revenue, from the safety fund.
Are there any questions on the amendment?
Do we need a second first?
If you want to move your,
Okay, I'll move my amendment.
okay. So moved by Senator Petty, seconded by Senator Sykes. So now, questions about the amendment. So it makes sure that there's no funding from the state safety fund going for students that are not high school kids. It addresses specifically just that with regard to the community colleges. Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no problem with the amendment as it's written. I just still have an issue with the fact that, the public schools is one thing, but then we're picking out, if the course is offered at a community college, but not if the course is offered by a private entity. You were calling it for-profit. If we're advancing beyond the high school years, why are we saying one entity would get state funds and the other would not?
I can't address the other But I think this amendment is specifically that they're in that age group of being high school students, and either the student can't take it at the time that it's made available by their school district, or the number of school districts that are moving away from offering it. There are costs associated for a school district to offer, insurance, renting the vehicles. Oftentimes, at least I know, the experience at my school district was which teachers were brave enough to teach driver's ed. And it was narrowed down to just 2 of them. So that's why school districts tend to move away from offering that. But if anyone else can speak to a preference, I don't know. Senator Petty?
I would just agree with you. I think, I mean, if you're old, and that's what I am. So I did take driver's ed when I was in high school, and at that time, driver's ed was pretty much offered by all of our public high schools, and probably and non-public as well. But they have moved very much away from it. A lot of it's due to costs, and just as you said, costs and insurance. And so it's become something that they've offered in the summer outside to lessen, so that those costs can be absorbed more readily by what their fees are that they're charging.
Okay. Committee, any other questions on the amendment? Would you like to move your amendment?
I'll move my amendment to Senate Bill 215.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Opposed? The amendment passes. Is there any, yes, Senator O'Shea.
I move that we pass Senate Bill 215 as amended favorably for passage.
Okay, I have a motion from Senator O'Shea. I have a second from Senator Sykes. Any additional discussion about this bill? It started as a simple bill that was just 2 pages.
Never say that.
It started as, I remember when this was brought to me, originally, this was a request of the Board of Regents, and they said, oh, it's really easy, it'll just get through, and should only take about 10 minutes in the hearing, and it's taken a lot more than that. So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate Bill 215 as amended passes favorably. Committee, like I said, on Monday, we will have the hearing on Senate Bill 499. We are not going to try and, we are not going to vote to move that out on Monday. I feel that there are probably, we might want to discuss about amendments that might be needed, but we will be working on final action of Senate Bill 362. So thank you so much for being here today. Please drive safely, and see you on Monday. Committee meeting's adjourned.